Olá, boa noite a todos e todas. Sejam todos bem-vindos a mais uma live promovida pela Sociedade Brasileira de Atividade Física e Saúde. Me chamo Jean e sou membro da equipe de mídias da sociedade. Sou um homem de 30 anos, pardo, com cabelo e barbas curto, uso óculos com armação azul e estou vestido com uma camisa verde. Antes de iniciarmos, eu gostaria de chamar a atenção de todos para um evento muito especial e muito importante que a sociedade promoverá amanhã. Será realizada uma live solidária em prol das vítimas do Rio Grande do Sul. O evento acontecerá a partir das 19h30 e contamos com a colaboração de todos vocês, através do Pix que está na arte e que posteriormente também será colocada nessa live. Para mais informações, basta acessar nossas mídias sociais. Em nome de toda a Sociedade Brasileira de Atividade Física e Saúde, gostaria de manifestar solidariedade para todas as pessoas afetadas pelas chuvas nesta região. Gostaria também de convidar todos vocês para seguir nossas redes sociais e vou propor um desafio. Todos aqueles que estão vendo essa live, que acessem as nossas redes sociais, peguem o post dessa live solidária e nos marquem, para que assim outras pessoas possam conhecer e possam contribuir com essas pessoas que estão em momento de grande sofrimento. Muito bem, hoje temos a alegria de receber o professor Russel Pate, que é da Universidade da Carolina do Sul, para um bate-papo para lá de especial. Vamos falar sobre o passado, a trajetória e o futuro da epidemiologia da atividade física. Para iniciar a conversa, eu gostaria de convidar a professora Cristiane, que é professora associada da Universidade Federal do Mato Grosso do Sul e atual presidente da Sociedade Brasileira de Atividade Física e Saúde. E também a professora Deise, que é pesquisadora no Centro de Telesaúde da UFMG e atual diretora científica da sociedade. Vou passar a bola aqui para elas. Sejam bem-vindas. Vou passar a bola para vocês, tá bom?
Muito obrigada, Jean, pela introdução. Hoje é uma live muito especial, porque é uma live de grande história na área da atividade física e saúde, e eu tenho, assim, a alegria de compartilhá-la aqui com a professora Deise. Então, eu sou a professora Cristiane Coelho Ravagnani, eu tenho a pele branca, cabelo comprido, com luzes, e estou usando um óculos na cor marrom.
Boa noite a todos. Vou fazer, então, a minha audiodescrição. É um prazer estar aqui participando da live. Eu sou uma mulher de pele clara, com cabelos curtos, um pouco avermelhados. Estou com uma blusa sem manga, laranja, com uma gola preta e branca. No meu fundo tem uma cama e uma parede branca.
Obrigada, Deise. O Jean vai projetar para a gente, então, as informações sobre a live solidária. Então, dizer que a gente presta grande solidariedade e a sociedade não podia ficar fora dessa, em ajudar nossos compatriotas do Rio Grande do Sul. Então, por favor, participem, colaborem, para que a gente consiga, de alguma forma, auxiliar as pessoas que estão nesse momento tão difícil. O professor Pate, então vou agora para a apresentação do professor Russel Pate. Para quem estuda ou estudou a área da atividade física e saúde, especialmente da epidemiologia da atividade física, o professor Pate dispensa apresentações, porque com certeza ele fez parte das referências bibliográficas de todos nós. Para vocês terem uma ideia, os artigos e as produções científicas do professor já foram citadas em torno de 140 mil vezes. Então, não é à toa que o professor Pate, ele já foi diretor do Children's Physical Activity Research Group. Ele é hoje o professor responsável por esse grupo, que eu tive a honra de fazer parte. Ele foi diretor executivo do National Physical Activity Plan Alliance, foi presidente do American College of Sports Medicine, também foi da diretoria do American Academy of Kinesiology and Physical Education, e também secretário da Associação for Health, Physical Education and Recreation. O professor tem um histórico muito importante na área da atividade física, e é uma honra poder compartilhar esse momento com ele. Professor Pate. Hello, good evening, Professor Pate. Would like to thank you for participating in this live held by the Brazilian Society of Physical Activity and Health, and tell you that it is a great honor to share this moment with you. I had the opportunity to be mentored by you and participate in your research group while I was in my postdoctoral training. So I would like to take this opportunity to honor the memory of Professor Stephen Blair, also who worked in the same department and simply left. It was maybe, I think it was one of the best professional experience in my life. So thank you very much for being here with us.
Well, the pleasure and honor is all mine, and it was wonderful to have you with us. And you did mention Steve Blair, and of course we all miss him very much. He was a wonderful friend and colleague, and as we all know, a tremendous contributor to our field, and we miss him a great deal.
We'll start with our questions, Professor. Can we start now?
Sure.
Okay. I remember in one occasion during a class taught by Professor Stephen Blair and May, that I asked him what was the highest VO2 max he had seen in his life, since he saw many aerobic tests in the Cooper Institute database. And he answered me that it was your VO2 max, that was around 80 milliliters per kilogram per minute. This great VO2 max is probably due to your history as a marathon runner. So my first question is, can you tell us about your career in this field of physical activity and health, and what led you to dedicate yourself to this field? Were you influenced by your athletic career?
I think that's true. I think my initial interest in pursuing an academic career in our field was at least partially a function of my own participation in distance running. I trained as a graduate student in exercise physiology because I was, I think, drawn to it by my interest in endurance performance. And I started my career doing performance-oriented exercise physiology research. I was particularly interested in female endurance runners and the impact of hematological factors on performance in female endurance athletes. But I was always interested in children from the time I was an undergraduate and trained in physical education. And as a graduate student, the program that I was in at the University of Oregon had a long history of studying fitness in particular, but physical activity and fitness in children. And so I did have that background, and very early in my own career, after my formal training, I involved myself in some projects related to measurement of physical fitness in children, and so I took that experience and interest forward a few years, and that interest became more intense, and I eventually had to make a decision between staying with exercise physiology research or moving more toward studies of physical activity in children and adolescents. And I felt that there was at that time an opportunity to do public health oriented research on physical activity in children that would make an important contribution. And so I made the decision to move in that direction, and have stayed there ever since.
Okay. So the interest for children's physical activity and to study this field is since you were an university student.
Yes.
Nice.
Yes. And at the time, that I made that decision, I really felt that, there had been very little public health oriented research on physical activity in children, and that there was a need for it. And, given my background and interest in the issues, as well as the setting, because by then our department was situated in the School of Public Health at the University of South Carolina. And so, in addition to Steve Blair, who was a close friend and colleague, I had a number of other colleagues who were public health researchers, epidemiologists, and biostatisticians, and experts in health promotion and education that I was able to collaborate with and draw into our research group.
Nice. Thank you. Professor Pate, we know that you, along with other researchers that you cited, like Professor Stephen Blair and Pfaffenberger, helped make physical inactivity recognized as an important risk factor for numerous diseases. Can you tell us a little about the history of the epidemiology of physical activity, and how was your participation in its history? Because we know that your participation was very important.
Well, I should say, first of all, I'm honored to even be mentioned in the same sentence with Jeremy Morris and Ralph Pfaffenberger and Steve Blair, who were just enormously important epidemiologists who have whose work has, I think, established our field as having a legitimate place in public health across the world. I think the way I would describe it is, Jeremy Morris and Ralph Pfaffenberger were really the groundbreakers. They were the two, very highly trained and experienced, and highly recognized epidemiologists who were the first to focus their primary research interest on the health effects of physical activity. And I think our field has benefited in retrospect enormously from the fact that, two very highly regarded epidemiologists who were, well into their career, their reputations were well established as very important epidemiologists at the time when they began studying physical activity. And I think that helped to, not only support the research that they undertook, but to, help disseminate the findings of the research as credible and important. So I think our field benefits tremendously from the fact that Morris and Pfaffenberger, were kind of the early pioneers. But then a second wave of very important scientists came along, and I would include Steve Blair in that group, and Bill Haskell in the U.S., and of course a number of important investigators around the world who began studying the relationship between physical activity and chronic disease health outcomes, as well as longevity, in large data sets. And they applied state-of-the-art analytic procedures to the data. They pioneered the measurement of physical activity as it could and should be applied in large-scale epidemiologic studies. And of course, their findings, in general, were that avoidance of very low levels of physical activity provide very important health benefits. They demonstrated that there's a dose-response relationship such that higher levels of activity are associated with lower risk, but that it's a curvilinear relationship, so that much of the benefit is derived from the transition from very little physical activity to at least modest levels of physical activity. And I think those early findings have held up, have been reinforced many times over, and have really stood the test of time, even though our methods for measuring physical activity have developed tremendously, and our analytic procedures have also evolved. But I think those early findings by that the first couple of waves of the public health researchers and physical activity have stood up very well over the years.
I think you are one of the most important epidemiologists of physical activity and health, and helped us with guidelines, physical activity guidelines, the first physical activity guidelines for Americans that showed for other countries how to do it, and around the world they can use these guidelines to benefit the population. So I think you are humble.
Well, I feel as though my primary contribution to the scientific literature is probably focused largely with children and adolescents. My work, kind of with the broader population and adults, I consider myself more a consumer of the research conducted by others, whereas our group has focused primarily on the health effects of physical activity and physical activity behavior in children and youth. I have been very honored to serve twice on the Physical Activity Guidelines Advisory Committee here in the U.S. And in both of those cases, my primary responsibility was to work on issues related to physical activity and health outcomes in children and youth. In the initial iteration of the U.S. guidelines released in 2008, there were recommendations included for school-age youth, and then I'm very pleased that we extended the age range with the second iteration of the guidelines released in 2018 by including recommendations for preschool age children in the 3 to 5 year old age range. I'm hopeful that when the guidelines are extended the next time, that we'll have recommendations for even younger children in the infant to toddler range. And a lot of my group's work in the last few years has been focused on physical activity in very young children.
Great. We will talk about the future studies. But now I have another question, Dr. Pate, about did you develop a lot of projects? And is there one that stands out to you as particularly impactful or meaningful? Could you share with us why it holds such significance for you?
Well, it's hard to pick just one because, as you know, you get very invested in all the studies that you do. I guess one that I'll mention that I'm proud of is a study that we called SHAPES, was the acronym, and it was a physical activity intervention that we operated in preschools, in early child care centers. And it was aimed at increasing the children's physical activity during the time when they were attending the preschools. It was a multi-component intervention. It was a experimental design, an experimental trial. We were able to demonstrate an increase in physical activity in the kids in the experimental centers. But I think what I'm particularly proud of is that we took the intervention methodology that we developed for that experimental trial, and having shown that it could increase children's physical activity, we then developed a methodology for training preschool teachers to deliver the intervention. And so we were able to obtain funding to develop an online training program for preschool teachers. And then subsequently, we were able to deliver that program statewide here in South Carolina. So, I mentioned this particular project because it's the one where I think we tried the hardest to, take the findings of the research and translate them to, to broad public health practice. And, that we all know that's a challenging thing. And, I'm proud of the fact that with that particular study, we were able to do that.
Yes, I think we need more interventions studies in our field because they are so important and to teach the people and professionals how to do the interventions.
Well, and implementation research to enable us to understand how we can best disseminate an intervention finding that has been a positive one.
So, Chris, can I have another question? Okay. I think you answered the next question, but I will ask again. If you have, is there any goal you still want to reach in your career? Can you share with us? Well,
yeah, that's a hard question. I thank you for asking it. I've never, felt like I had, highly specific long-term goals. I think it's more, I've thought of, one project or one activity leading to the next. And, as opportunities have come along to, be involved in in activities that show promise in terms of expanding the role of physical activity in public health. I've tended to take those opportunities, but I haven't, really thought of it as, having a specific goal. It's more, I'd like my work to, to strengthen the role of physical activity in public health. When the chance to contribute to that comes along, then I've tended to try to take advantage of those opportunities.
Okay, I know that your research now is focused on toddlers and babies, maybe even babies in your study. Can you tell us about this project? Tell us more about this project.
Yes, and we're very much in the middle of preparing manuscripts based on the data that we've collected in this study. We call it Launch, and it's a prospective cohort design in which we recruited about 150 mothers and infants, and we administered a measurement protocol to the children at 6-month intervals between 6 months of age at baseline, and the last follow-up was when they were approximately 36 months of age. So we have, 6 data points between six months of age and 36 months. The kids wore accelerometers, and that was the basis for the measure of physical activity. We also collected data on their sleep behavior. The mothers completed, an extensive survey that provided a lot of information about the home environment and, the childcare environment if the child was attending childcare outside the home. And so what we have been doing, what we set off to do and what we have been doing is to describe change in physical activity as children develop from 6 to 36 months of age, and then to also identify factors that predict or associate with their change in physical activity. We've also studied weight change across that period, and again, have worked to identify factors that influence weight change between 6 and 36 months. So we are just now completing manuscripts, to address some of those major issues. I will mention that we were about a year into this study when the COVID pandemic hit, and that, of course, required quite a bit of adaptation in the protocol, and we had to modify the data collection protocol such that there was no direct contact between our staff and the children or the mothers. We were very fortunate that the mothers were very committed to the study, very supportive, and so we were able to rely on them to take the accelerometers that we would leave at their home, get them on the kids, have them wear the monitors for the prescribed period, and complete surveys and the other elements of the protocol. The one thing we were not able to do was continue to administer the same motor developmental status assessment. We had to go from a hands-on protocol, the Peabody protocol, to survey-based assessment of motor developmental status. But otherwise, we were able to maintain the planned protocol through the pandemic period.
Dr. Pate, what are the main outcomes of this research, or the health outcomes, or motor development, or in the health outcomes?
Yeah, the primary outcome variable was physical activity. That was the plan, was to describe change in physical activity across that period of time, and then consider a fairly large number of independent variables as factors that might influence change in physical activity across that period of observation. So the study really was focused on physical activity in very young kids.
Can I ask a question about this study? I
Sure.
am very curious about if there any influence of breastfeed or the type of labor in these physical activity levels.
Yeah, we measured all that, and in some cases, those factors did come in as significant in the longitudinal analyses that we've conducted. So it turns out that those variables are interesting. I won't claim that I fully understand, all the relationships, but it does look as if those are, those are potentially important and certainly worthy of more research in the future.
Great, really nice. Maybe is there any exerkines in the breastfeed milk?
I don't know that. I don't know that.
So the next question is me, Chris, or you? Can I go on? Dr. Pate, how do you see the future of physical activity epidemiology? What are the biggest challenges and opportunities?
Well, there are some big challenges. And one of them is we are in a period in which there's a transition from epidemiologic research on physical activity that is based largely on self-reported physical activity. And I think we need to recognize that our field really became established with that approach to measurement, of the behavior, and it's taken us a long way. It's worked remarkably well. But of course, now we have device-based measures of physical activity that are not only available, but they are they're available for use on a large scale. And when we first started using accelerometers to measure physical activity, it was not feasible to use them on large numbers of study participants, but that's no longer the case. And quite large epidemiologic studies are now being undertaken with device-based measurement of physical activity. And not surprisingly, there are differences between self-reported physical activity and device-based measures of physical activity. And I think we're in the process of reconciling, understanding those differences where they appear and how they might influence our understanding of the dose response relationship between physical activity and health outcomes, and how that those differences might influence our conclusions that we would draw from large surveillance studies. So I know there's some folks that are kind of rethinking some of these things, and are in the midst of using findings from these very large epidemiologic studies that have used device-based measurement of physical activity to re-examine the relationship between physical activity levels and health outcomes. And those reconsiderations, I think, may at some point, prompt us to adopt new conclusions about the percentage of the population that is adequately physically active. I'm not sure we're all the way there to making those conclusions, but I think that is an important direction for epidemiologic research on physical activity right now. It's certainly in our interest and in the interest of public health to have the best information that we can find on that relationship between physical activity and health outcomes. We should be basing our physical activity guidelines and recommendations on the best available epidemiologic data. And I think those data are evolving right now with new measurement techniques. And, it may well be that we'll need to revisit some of our earlier conclusions.
Nice. I think in Brazil, we are still facing problems in using accelerometers because the price of these devices, the bureaucracy to use it, so many factors that we face in Brazil to use these accelerometers in our research.
Yes, understood.
Yes, and I think this is a problem for low-income countries. This is a huge problem.
Well, we're very lucky in the U.S. to have the National Institutes of Health that is in a position to fund fairly large studies and some of those that have used accelerometry with a large number of study participants have been multi-center studies where there may be 6 or 8 universities participating in the research. But we're fortunate to have a National Institutes of Health that is in a position to fund large studies like that.
And do you think, Dr. Pate, that we have enough studies in children's epidemiology?
Oh no, no. I think that the research that we have and upon which we have based physical activity guidelines is solid, but it tends to be very limited in terms of conclusions that can be drawn about subgroups of the population. So, for example, I think it's very important for us to learn about differences in the relationship between physical activity and health outcomes that may be there between males and females, across race ethnicity groups, and across socioeconomic groups. And the research that we have at this point really does not provide answers about what those differences might be. So that certainly is an area where we need more work, and we need we need more large scale prospective epidemiologic studies. The UK has been successful in launching some large scale prospective observational studies that have included really good measures of physical activity and factors that might influence physical activity. And I do think we need more of that sort of research. Where it's an established birth cohort that is then followed for 20 and 25 years, and we need studies like that in across the world, in developing countries and as well as in the more developed countries. So in the U.S., I thought we were fairly close to establishing a large birth cohort several years ago, and then it ended up not being undertaken by the government. But I do hope that maybe that opportunity will come along in the future here and in other countries like yours.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Pate. And finally, the last question, okay. Brazilian Society of Physical Activity and Health will hold the PhD course, the Physical Activity and Public Health course. Mm-hmm. And we know that this course began as an initiative from CDC, and now is hosted by USC, South Carolina University. And you are very attached with this course. So can you tell us about briefly about this course and how important it is?
Well, I'm biased. I think it's been an important initiative. The idea really emerged from a planning process that was undertaken by the American Heart Association in the mid 1990s, when public health physical activity recommendations were first being established, and as a part of that planning process, it was decided that there was a need for training of more researchers that would be able to conduct important research on physical activity and health. At the time, the American Heart Association had been conducting, a somewhat analogous training program for cardiovascular epidemiology. And so when the opportunity came along to develop a training course on physical activity and public health research, we loosely modeled the physical activity course around the cardiovascular epidemiology course that the American Heart Association had been offering for some years at that time. We've now been doing the physical activity public health course for over 20 years, and the program has certainly evolved tremendously in that period. I think when we first started the course in the 90s, what we were doing was essentially retraining scholars that had trained in another area and had decided that they wanted to change the direction of their research and were looking for training in that new area. I think that's no longer the case. I think in the intervening years, there are now many academic institutions that are training doctoral students to do public health research on physical activity. And so I think the nature of the course has changed because the nature of the need and the demand has changed. And now I think the course and we serve largely postdocs and early career researchers, I think what we do is, add some additional training to their experience. But I think also we expose the participants to kind of a wide range of research issues that the faculty think are going to be important opportunities for research in the coming years. Because most of the fellows who take the course now, are either in postdoctoral training or they're early in their academic careers, and are still looking to develop their research programs. In addition, one thing that's been a constant really throughout the history of the course is a focus on grantsmanship, on training the participants, helping the participants, develop the grantsmanship skills that will enable them to, be successful in seeking funding to support their research. So much of the course is structured around the National Institute of Health's, kind of grant development protocol. Although, I think that protocol is really not much different than protocols that are used by funding agencies around the world. So it's been, it's been a lot of fun, and we've had, a lot of wonderful fellows that have pursued the course, and we've had amazing loyalty from faculty, many of whom have served as faculty members for many years. So it's been an enjoyable project for sure.
Nice, very nice. Our course will be in Salesópolis in São Paulo in September. So
wonderful.
The fourth edition. So, Dr. Pate, thank you so much for being here with us. And it's a great pleasure to see you again, to talk to you again. And I hope we can talk in US sometime, but or you come to Brazil.
Either way would be great. I'll look forward to it. And thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you tonight. And been a great pleasure. Great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pate.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, thank you. Tchau, pessoal. Muito obrigada pela audiência de vocês. A live vai estar no YouTube. Espero que tenham gostado. E amanhã tem a nossa live solidária. Um grande abraço. Até mais. Até amanhã. Tchau, tchau. Obrigada, Jean.
Good night.